I'm Trent England for Save Our States, here with another one of our 6 Questions podcast. This is 6 Questions for Tara Ross. Tara has been a champion of the Electoral College for a long time, the author of multiple books about the Electoral College, including a children's book, which is, I think, my favorite, but also Enlightened Democracy, the Case for the Electoral College. Tara, thanks so much for being on our podcast.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Trent.
Well, let's get right into it. The first question is why the Electoral College? Why is this an interest of yours?
Well, it's a funny and surprising reason. I was in law school and I broke my arm. This is a true story. I broke my arm in a taxi cab. You should always wear your seatbelt in a taxi cab because sometimes they do get in wrecks. I was in a wreck, sitting in the backseat of a taxi cab, not wearing my seatbelt, and so I got thrown around a bit, broke my arm. I was in my last semester of law school and I needed something easy to do that would not require me to take notes in class. And so I literally started studying the Electoral College because it was quote unquote easy. And I thought I could get through an independent study on that and help me with my broken arm situation. But what I ended up discovering is that I had never really understood this at all, that my schooling had completely left me just unprepared to know anything about how we elect our president or why we do it the way that we do. And the other thing I noticed during this time frame, this was in the spring of 2001. So it was right after the Bush versus Gore mess that happened. And what I noticed during this period of time is that, people think that it's partisan, especially in the wake of that election. People thought if you're for Bush, then you're for the Electoral College, and otherwise you're for Gore. But what people don't know is that Al Gore actually thought during the fall of 2000, he thought that he was going to win the Electoral College and lose the popular vote. And so he had a team of lawyers preparing for that, preparing to defend that kind of a victory to the nation. And what it showed me is just how easily this can go in either direction. And it's really not about partisan politics. It's about whether the system serves us well, whether it serves the country, regardless of our political party. And so, I learned of course, it's been a constant learning journey for me for the past few decades since then, but that's how it got started, was with a broken arm in law school.
That's a great story. You never know what your momentary decision is going to produce decades down the road. That's terrific.
It's so true.
Yeah. So another book that you've written is called She Fought Too. It's stories of Revolutionary War heroines. Where did you find those stories? Because it's so unusual. It's a side of history that we rarely get to read about. How did you come up with the idea for the book? And then where did you find the stories?
Well, I guess that was just another, God leads in random ways, I guess, sometimes, right? I ended up in this situation where I'm writing daily history blogs. And again, I didn't have any real reason in mind, except I thought it would be easy. It turns out it's not really that easy, but I had just had my son and I wanted something easy to do to keep my foot in the door for a few months while I kind of just, was being a new mom. And so as it turned out, there's a lot of history out there that none of us were taught, that we just have no clue. Right? We get the headline stories in our history classes in school if we're lucky, and that's all we know. And so, I don't even know to tell you about where I get the stories. I spend a lot of time digging in books. I spend a lot of time Googling history. Some days I literally Google, or not Google, but I do a word search in Kindle, and all these history books to find a date that will be my date hook for the day. And then I go dig up information about it. Whatever it is, I spend a lot of time researching as much as anybody. I've bought myself a lot of books about, I don't know. I have so many books in my library, or my bookshelf next to my desk. I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to answer that question. It's kind of random. It could be anything. But once I get it, though, I just start digging until I figure it out. And I should say, now that I've been doing it for so long, people send me ideas too, which is fantastic. And they'll say something like, a couple of days ago, I did a submarine story. Did you hear about this submarine? And maybe I hadn't, but I go dig up information about it. And I have a whole spreadsheet of ideas now. I have this very complicated Excel spreadsheet. So any given day I can go look and see the ideas that people have sent me, or maybe that I had myself when I was just reading a book, and I can figure out what I'm going to do for the next day.
That's great. I think though that goes to, the mind that's prepared for learning is prepared to find it anywhere,
Maybe,
right?
maybe.
That's those random ideas, and I'm sure a lot of the people watching or listening subscribe to your daily history on Facebook, but if they don't, they certainly should, because it's always fun and interesting, and I especially like the Medal of Honor stories
Mhm.
that you provide. Those are, I think it's important for people to know those stories of ordinary American heroes.
It probably, I agree completely. And I try to find them because they're so, I feel like people are so down on America sometimes right now because, I don't know, you're supposed to be or something because the media is, or I don't know. And it's just not true. America is a great, wonderful place. Are we perfect? No, but nobody is. Do we always try? Are we always working for more and more and more freedom? Yes, absolutely. Yes, we absolutely do that. And so I definitely look for those stories to remind us of all the sides of our heritage we can be proud of and talk about that. And that doesn't mean we have to ignore the bad stuff, but I think we need equal treatment. And right now we're over focused on the bad. And so I try to help that in the other direction.
You do a great job. Terry,
Thank
you're
you.
also you're a retired attorney. Do you have advice for young people out there who are thinking about or entering into law school? What's your advice for aspiring law students and attorneys?
Well, do not go to law school unless you know why you're there. And I just say that because the first year especially is just a beating. And there's just nothing else to say about it. It's a beating. Now, I do not think, the quote, why I'm going to be here has to be, I want to be a lawyer. I think there could be lots of other things. My personal plan, it, I thought I'll go to law school. I mean, I just buckled down the first semester. I was like, I knew I had to make A's to get the good clerkships I wanted or whatever. And I just did nothing else. And that's what I did. Be prepared for that. Do nothing else for your first year of law school. That's what you're doing. And after that you can lighten up a little bit. But my plan was to go to be a lawyer, to go, sit in a firm for a while and just live like I was still in law school so that I could pay off my loans really fast and do all this sort of stuff. And then go do what I really wanted to do, which is I thought I'd probably land at a think tank and do something like that. But probably a lot like what you do, Trent. But instead I kind of do it for myself and it's worked out that way. But I definitely had an end game in mind so that when you get into those finals or whatever, you can just have your eye on the ball. Surround yourself with people who are not easily stressed. That's probably my other advice to somebody going to law school. I definitely worked hard. When you get to law school, you'll see there's some kinds of people that just stress out about everything, and it's very hard to study when you're surrounded by that. I had friends that were older, that were already married, and that, I think we're a little bit more even keeled and could keep each other even keeled too. So I guess those are my main points of advice for law school. It's no picnic, but look, it teaches you to think. You were saying, how did you find those stories earlier? In law school, I mean, it taught me how to approach a problem, how to find, how to dig, it prepared me really well for what I do right now. It's maybe a tangent on what I thought I was going to do, but it prepared me really, really well to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's all great advice. I have a friend who is a J school graduate, started out as a journalist, went into think tanks, and he said to me one day, he said that his favorite journalists were mostly people who were trained as attorneys. I thought that was fascinating, but it goes to what you're saying, that legal education teaches you to dig and ask good questions and
Mhm.
put things together in terms of stories, which is what you do so well. Uh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I co-authored a George Washington book, as you know. And so when we were talking, something simple, like they had said George Washington was using powder for days of Thanksgiving and stuff. So I didn't just say to myself, well, I assume he's using up powder that he needs. I actually called a military historian. I said, explain to me how a cannon works. Was he really using something that he would be able to? We went through all of the different angles of what this powder, I don't remember the details anymore. This was like 15 years ago, but all of the details of what exactly George Washington had said, what exactly was he using, and it turns out there's multiple ways to fire some of these things. And he probably wasn't using quite as much as I thought he was or whatever, but he was using some. Anyway, so that's the kind of thing they teach you to do in law school, is to not make assumptions about, what's in front of you, but to dig all the different angles and make sure you've covered all of the sides and aren't leaping to conclusions that turned out to not be true.
Yeah. Okay, so back to the Electoral College, Tara Ross, what do you think is the most compelling argument for the Electoral College?
I think for us, the most compelling argument is just how big and diverse America is. And to think about the situation that was in front of the founders. They knew their history. They knew that that historically speaking, when government is too far away from the people, that tends to be a huge, big problem. Also, the difficulties of governing when you have so many different kinds of variety of people. They thought a country of 13 states was too big for one national government. And they felt like a creative solution was needed. Well, now we've got 50 and it's so much bigger. And people say the Electoral College is outdated. I say the opposite. I say they thought 13 states was too big for, single one size fits all solutions. And we're at 50. And so the president is the only person that is elected by all of us. We all, is expected to represent all of us. That's not true of any other official in this country because of the way the founders dealt with the problem. They dealt with it by creating a federalist system where power is divided among the states, where you elect your own governor or you elect your own representative in Congress. States used to appoint senators, and now, of course, we elect them. But that's all kind of divided up, and it's divided up so that our differences can be reflected in government. But the president needed a way to reflect that also. And so we have chosen to do that by doing a state-by-state presidential election system. And so, of course, within the states, it's democratic as it works out. So you get to vote for your presidential electors who are going to go vote for you for president or vote for your state for president. But also we add that state-by-state element. And I think it's hugely important to America right now because of the diverse nature of our country and because of the many needs and perspectives and subcultures and industries and, urban versus not urban voters and all of the stuff that you have going on in America. And, lately there's been a push to try to squeeze us into all these one size fits all molds as if we can come up with one solution that fits all of us all the time. It's just not true. And so I think the faster we get back to recognizing who we really are, a diverse people who, yes, have similarities that we try to focus on for certain national purposes, but mostly we're just diverse and we need to reflect that in our election systems.
So our final question here on our Save Our States 6 Questions podcast is always, who's your favorite founding father, Tara Ross, and why?
George Washington. and I probably largely because I've studied him so much, I did co-author a book about him, but I could probably just relate to him in some ways. One surprise, it might be my favorite trivia question about George Washington, but George Washington had a horrible temper and he overcame that. Now, so, and I can get kind of strong-willed myself. So I love that he had this challenge in his life, and I love that he conquered it and he worked so hard to do it. In fact, that now if you think about George Washington, you don't think the man had a temper. You think of him as kind of this stoic, emotionless guy. Well, he wasn't emotionless at all. He was a guy who had learned to control his temper and his passions so well that that's what we think of him. Now that's what it is. So I don't know. I admire him. He was just ambitious enough to get where he needed to go, but not so ambitious that he didn't, at the end of the day, just want to step down and go home to Mount Vernon. He could have been king, and he didn't do it. Was he perfect? No, he owned slaves. We all know this, but also he over time, as he was fighting the revolution, was watching all the things going on around him, he questioned that. He wondered what was going on and could it be fixed? And he talked about it, like, how do we fix this? I don't think he ever landed on a solution that really worked well during his lifetime, but he knew it was a problem. He tried to take small steps at Mount Vernon. He quit selling his slaves. He tried to keep families together. He freed his slaves in his will. I mean, he did a lot of things to try to fix the problem. I think the problem was just too big for him, to solve on his own. But I appreciate that he was a critical thinker who didn't just accept what was happening and, blew it off. He learned, he watched what was going on around him, and he took it into account, and he started to change his mind. And that takes a big person to change your mind about something like that. So there's a whole mess of things I admire about George Washington. He's my absolute favorite.
Wonderful. Tara Ross, author of many books, including She Fought Too, Stories of Revolutionary War Heroines. I want to make sure I get that right.
Yes.
As well as books about the Electoral College and George Washington. Tara, thanks so much for being a part of our 6 Questions podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.